Thanks very much, everyone, for being here. So today we're going to be really talking about this approach to digitizing the mine. And this is such a buzzword today across all industries, but what does this really mean in the mining space? And what are some of the barriers that you might come up against in the process of digitizing the mine? So how do we overcome some of these barriers, and how do we actually start to rack up those quick wins along the process to keep things moving forward? And actually start to generate some success within the organization and motivate people to keep moving forward. We'll also be talking a little bit about what Komatsu as an organization is doing on this journey to digitization and how we're helping customers also along the way. And one of the ways that we're doing that is we have a newly formed data solutions team that we'll be discussing and leveraging that team and a cross-collaborative approach across all of the different elements of the Komatsu organization, leveraging the strengths with technology across the OEMs and bringing everything together to form a unified team and a unified approach on this journey to digitization. So I'm Simon Van Wegen. I'm the product manager on this newly formed team for data solutions. So my background is primarily in maintenance in mining. I have around 13 years experience working previously for Rio Tinto in their asset health area, roles in maintenance engineering and reliability engineering, and spent the last 5 years in modular mining systems working in the maintenance systems and data analytics space. And I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Jason.
I'm Jason Knuth, Senior Manager of Data Solutions. I have been with Komatsu for about 13 years. I started my career as a mechanical engineer, got my master's in predictive analysis, and then kind of moved into data science, data role within the organization about 5 years ago, working on the underground side of the business and now also the surface. So a part of this newly formed team, we've been kind of going out to different customers the last couple of months and kind of understanding a voice of customer, understanding how do you guys do your journey? How do people go about this? And there's been common themes and common strategies that we kind of seen. And so the first little bit here we're going to kind of set up is how that process we've seen, some barriers and some issues. And the first thing that we always see is that manufacturing companies or even mining companies need to kind of have that first initial goal. The goals in mind of what are you trying to do? What are you trying to digitize? Once you have that goal in mind, then that's where you can actually drive what strategies you can apply. These strategies are more around your organization, how your organization's set up, and how you're actually going to drive these initiatives. And in this area, seen traditionally about 3 different strategies. The first one is on convergence. Convergence is your centralization of information. This is where you're actually changing your org structure and creating a holistic one-team approach where you're actually forcing down the procedures and mandates of how exactly you implement this technology. The coordination is similar as you centralize it, but the business units within your organization may stay the same, where you're actually having more of a collaborative approach and you have a committee or a team together to help decide what the priorities are, how do you move forward, and those different things. And that's kind of where the coordination method, having goals in mind, you really should only have 1 to 2 goals in mind. Otherwise, we've seen a lot of confusion and very hard to drive these effective changes in your organization. And lastly, there's the separate innovation. It's the complete opposite of convergence, where you're bringing it all centralized, and separation innovation is decentralizing it. Your business units know best on how they want to implement the technology. They're the ones who potentially get the greatest quick wins the fastest. And so you got to understand there's a balance between decentralization and centralization, and you can kind of see the coordination is kind of in the middle of that. And so every time you have a goal in mind, you got to really think about how you want to apply the strategy, and don't think that you have to pick one or the other. You can pick a combination of them, but just make sure you understand what you're strategically trying to do. And once you have how you implement it, or the strategies, is how you're going to implement it. And what we've seen is, spoke earlier, someone said earlier in the discussion about Agile, it's around the plan, do, check methods, or the decision-making process of you have the goal in mind, how do you keep that goal in mind and make sure you're tracking with everything in process. With that goal in mind, you have your plan, do, check, which really allows making sure that you're making those incremental gains in incremental process along the way. You don't want to start a project, 2 years later come back and say, here, I have the greatest solution. You want to deliver value as you go.
So what does this journey really look like? It's a common trap that people fall into is thinking that this digitization journey actually has an end. And really, it's something that, as Jason mentioned, there's that continuous improvement process. There's always going to be ways to improve. There's always going to be new technology to adopt. There's always going to be people to be trained, bringing people on board as you move forward. And what you'll find is that as you move along the way, you're going to have to achieve these different milestones to keep bringing the buy-in. And also, you're going to come across different barriers. So if we look at the different approaches that Jason talked about, where convergence, where we're really looking at centralizing everything on this strategy, one of the common barriers here is that you find is seizing autonomy away from the operations. The people on the front line, it's very easy for them to become removed from the decision-making process and not be so involved, and driving this approach where we're actually dictating things rather than orchestrating the overall approach. So it's important to be aware of this moving forward. Some of the other challenges that you might see across the different paths, and particularly in coordination, is having a lack of a mechanism to measure as we move forward and track the maturity and growth of the organisation as you move forward. And they often say that you can't improve what you can't measure, so this is really important. And also overwhelming the workforce. If we're driving all of these different ideas across the organisation with so many different people, they've already got their day jobs, and so how do we actually get them focused because they're saying we don't have enough time. This is too difficult. And finally, on the separate innovation approach, really some of the challenges that you might see here is actually the existing silos that are already there in the organisation. We might actually exacerbate those and make things worse, or we may introduce new silos to the organisation. If you have people looking at different ways of reporting different data, maybe slightly different KPIs, it can create some confusion in the organisation, and people can start to travel on their own separate paths. So some of the tactical barriers that we see here, without this important element of leadership and having strong governance with this transformation approach, some of the things that you might see is being too driven by technology. And this is something that commonly happens, people following the technology trends and saying we have to adopt the latest and greatest technology with everything that we're doing. Often you lose sight of, well, what do we already have and how can we solve these problems quickly with what we already have? And we call this the shiny toy effect, and it can cause a lot of problems on the journey. Secondly, drowning in the data. There's this appetite to collect so much data from so many different sources and just put it somewhere without really giving thought to, okay, well, what are we actually doing with this data? What problems are we solving for our organisation with this data? And what happens is this data tends to accumulate, and we call this the data swamp. The data just stagnates. No one's really looking at it. No one's really leveraging this data to actually understand, what can we learn from this data? And if you don't have that structured approach in terms of how you're accessing that data, how you're using that data, it can become more and more difficult to actually go in there and find what you're looking for. Creating multiple versions of the truth, in this siloed approach, often we have different ways of reporting the same thing that looks quite different to someone, or maybe they're collecting slightly different data for the same purpose. So when we have these kind of different versions of the truth across the organisation, this can increase those silos. And then finally, a common problem is trying to solve everything at once and trying to be perfect. You call this boiling the ocean, and it is a common challenge where rather than focusing on where can we really deliver value quickly, it's a broad brush approach of trying to do everything, and you often see that people will stumble in this area.
So having after these tactical barriers and the data swamp and how do you even get started? This is kind of where making sure that you take this data and all this information and actually drive actions. And so the way we look at it is having that first layer of that data integration. And when people first hear that, they think, oh, I got to put all the data in one spot. It has to be all in one spot. Well, that's not really always the case. It's more about democratization, making it available, making that one common data source available to everyone that needs it, so you don't have redundancies, you don't have that thing. But once you have that data integration layer, then you can apply the information layer on top of it, where you're actually driving what insights do you want from this data. You're enriching the data to really drive your organization. And lastly, the action. So what actions can you apply with that information to get it to the right person at the right time, how they want it, when they want it, where they want it. So all those things are trying to how to drive that action and making sure that you're on time with the information. And through some of the mechanisms that we found is through those continuous improvements, so CIs, making sure that you understand why you're getting this data, why you need that data, so you don't drive a data swamp. So you always start the project, I want to do this in goal in mind, and what are the possible data sources I need, and that way it ensures that you're using the right data and information, and for the next project, you kind of you're setting yourself up for success of what the next thing you might need. Now, part of having this data to action and how you actually implement it is really making sure you have more of a balanced implementation. Becoming a digital leader takes a concerted effort. It really fully looks at the holistic approach of how do you do that plan, do, check, how do you actually get those quick wins, and that's that plan, do, check, the continuous improvement. There are some key driving principles that I like to look at. First thing is, what is the value drivers for doing this in the first place? Why are you doing it? Making sure that's very well known. The strategy, what type of strategies you're trying to go with, and also having the goals very well known and very well defined and being very aspirational with the goals. And when I look at this, I like to almost look at it it's a orchestra of information, an orchestra of stuff that you will need in your organization to actually enable this transformation. And this is where having a clear go-to-market strategy, and don't think that this is only external go-to-market, but this is also internal. So when you have your organization, the people who are going to be interacting with your technology, even if they're the mine site or the personnel, they are your customer. Think of them as how are you going to deliver that go-to-market of how to deliver value to them and making sure that every change and everything you do is value add. The next thing is engagement. Having key stakeholders within your organization to really help drive that change management, making sure that you're on track with what you're trying to deliver. Having partners, strategic partners, whether it's internal partners in your organization or even external partners that have been kind of working in this space can help drive these initiatives and making sure that we're all stay on track. And lastly, probably the most important thing is your workforce. The workforce truly has to understand what is the value in it. They want a desire to support it. You really have to make the campaign around of how is this going to make their job easier, how is it going to make it safer, how is it going to make them more productive in their days, and they really have to get behind it. And lastly, or second to last, is the operations. Operations, the processes that break down silos, making sure you have consistent efforts to help enhance the collaborations, and IT capability. This one here in particular is a very interesting one because the fact that I've seen in the past organizations, they have great initiatives, they show great value in digitization, and then all of a sudden they make their wins, they say this is all good, and then that team goes away, and then about 6 months later, what happened to that project? So how do you make this stuff sustainable? You have to make sure you have the infrastructure and the support team to make these projects sustainable. Otherwise, in 5 years, you're going to be doing the same project over and over. Lastly, the organization, that structure, which enhances that collaboration, prioritizes your initiatives, what you need to work on, the incentives. What are those value drivers, and why should people work on them, and how does that support your change within your organization? And another big one with that workforce is that culture. Especially in our industry, you see a lot of people have the gut check. That just feels good. The gut. How do we drive a organization to actually be more data-driven decision making, where they can actually understand why quantitatively why they're making this decision and proof. And this kind of where it comes into the agile implementation of these organizations. And so as you can see, this is a whole concert of effort of people throughout your organization. It's very challenging at times to get them all to work together. So to get them to work together, similar in an orchestra, when you first put your orchestra together, you're not going to first play Beethoven. The first thing you're going to do is try to play something simple, like chopsticks. And so Simon here is going to play chopsticks.
Yeah, so let's take a look at how to play chopsticks. So really what this is about is being agile in the organization, and how can we actually target the quick wins? How can we get those wins on the board? And you can kind of think of this a little bit like a flywheel, where once you get the momentum, then things start to move forward on their own, and you really start to pick up that momentum as you get more of these quick wins on the board. And it's important to realize that it doesn't necessarily take an advanced data miner to identify where these opportunities are. Quite often, these big opportunities float to the surface. The key people in the organization are aware of these opportunities, and so how can we actually target these opportunities? And being able to let the Pareto rule drive this decision making. So, what are the 20% of initiatives that are going to deliver us the 80% of the value? And how do we uncover what these are? How do we actually start to focus on these particular initiatives and target these for success? So what are some of the things that are maybe having the most impact on the productivity? What are maybe some of the things that are driving the costs? What are the components that are failing more frequently? What are we spending more of our time maintaining? And what's some of the key downtime influences? So an important part of this is actually being able to talk to the people on the front line. And that sounds simple, but it's often overlooked, is closing that feedback loop with the people who are down on the operating face. And these people are actually living and breathing these challenges every single day. And they have some really good insights to offer on this whole process. So it's very important to include them in the process where we can actually start to understand from their perspective what are the problems and actually leverage their ideas as well. And what you may see is if you leave these people out of the process, they will not only not have that sense of ownership and not help move things forward, but they may actually become detractors and actually feel threatened by this and try to prevent it from happening. So finally, don't get lost looking for the needle in the haystack. If we have this wealth of data, it's often an approach that is taken by the data science people, that they want to go off looking for new problems to solve, uncovering new things in the data. And what we find is they may spend a lot of time going through the data with a fine-tooth comb, looking for these things and uncover opportunities that really aren't that important to the organization. And they've gone down a rabbit hole spending all of this time. So it's really important to understand the opportunity size and how it's going to affect the organization. So off that, we're going to start to talk a little bit about the approach that Komatsu is taking on this journey to digitization, and then also how we're helping our customers on this journey. And we really look at this across two different areas with this data solutions unified team. And one area is around enhancing the way that we look at mining. So this is really around the big data and leveraging the cloud computing capability, where we're bringing all of these different data sources together so that we can actually unify these different data sources from different parts of the organization, from the OEMs, from the OTMs, from other third parties, where we can bring that in and improve the workflow management process. And so how can we actually leverage this and start to include the knowledge base within the organization, bring in the subject matter expertise to actually get more value out of all of this information, and start to leverage all of this to drive the improvements down on the operating face. And this is really where we get across into this domain of improving the way that mining is done and leveraging edge computing capability for this purpose. So how can we actually deliver to the people on the front line the key information for them to improve their role? Improving the operator experience, so how can we actually deliver the real-time feedback to the operators to coach them on their behavior for operating the equipment? How can we help them with improvement and benchmarking them across their crew and across the whole organization? Excuse me. And also improving the maintainer experience, where we look at maintainer of the future and how can you provide the key information to the maintenance personnel at their fingertips for diagnostic purposes to help them move into a more proactive prognostic space, and also to help them with their day-to-day task management and recording of the feedback of the work that they're doing so that we can continue to drive that continuous improvement and learn from what was done in the field.
So now that we have our Komatsu goals established from the edge compute to the cloud compute area, what types of strategy are we going to apply? If you remember from the first slide, when we talk about the convergence, coordination, and innovation, Komatsu, we're looking at to bring together a team of people and actually have more of a design committee, have that coordination method of where we're combining our equipment manufacturers, the steel manufacturers, and their technology with Comtrax Plus and Smart Solutions, and also our technologies areas with Mindware and Modular on the optimization of the mine and how the equipment's being utilized as a holistic thing inside of the mine. So together and through CI activities, we're kind of combining these efforts into one holistic team, which divides and brings together the whole new data solutions team. And there's some key reasons why we picked the coordination strategy. Is really trying to, right now we offer a lot of things already to the industry, and we don't want to disrupt any of that. And so we kind of want to make sure that what we're building on the side is in a positive light, and also working closely with customers to make sure everything is value driven. So that's why we're going out to VOCs and making sure these quick wins and making sure what we're doing is incremental and also showing value along the way. So we don't say, see you later for 5 years and then come back and say, I got the greatest shiny toy. And so it's kind of trying to do that more coordination, holistic approach for very collaboration.
So what does this really look like in moving forward with digitization? So we talked about these different capabilities in terms of the edge and cloud, and really edge capability is about delivering the right information to the right people so that they can act on that information. So equipment operator, really we have the capability to start to leverage edge computing and deliver the feedback to the operators at the right time for them to improve their role. Give them the right visualization and some gamification that they can actually start to really get a feel for the work that they're performing, how they're performing in relation to the rest of the crew, and then drive that positive continuous improvement approach. And then in the technician, with access to maybe smartphone devices, how can we actually give them the key insights that they need that they're really going to be able to use to act upon in the way that they're performing repairs, how they can optimize the work that they're doing, and also record very good feedback, maybe take photos of the work that they're doing in the field, and all of that information captured centrally. And then the remainder of the mine personnel delivering the right insights to these people, the right reports, KPIs, production data and asset health information, so that they can use this information, they can drive the planning department and actually move this information through the organisation in the appropriate manner. Across to the cloud capability, where we're bringing everything together and leveraging the capability of not only data scientists, but also importantly, the subject matter expertise, the people that have designed the equipment, the people that understand how this equipment is being used in the field, so that we can actually bring those two sides together to continue to learn from what we're doing, how can we make it better, and then deliver that down to the edge. So to talk a little bit about a specific case study in edge capability. So this particular situation is something that was detected after discussions to different customers. What we see is this articulated face engagement around the articulated wheel loaders. And this particular situation takes place when the bucket of the machine is engaging with the operating face while the machine is articulated with the bucket raised. And this can have a detrimental effect to the machine, so it's important to be able to detect that. And analytics capability was developed to be able to detect this on stream data on the cloud, but there's a lot of opportunity to actually deliver this in a more real-time sense directly to the operator, because it relates to how I'm operating the machine right now and how can I potentially improve my behavior. So we work together across Modular and Komatsu to actually deliver this information and integrate, be able to containerize this algorithm, deploy it to the edge, and then deliver fast feedback in real time with some context to the operator. So to talk a little bit about an example of some of the work that we're doing in terms of quick wins in cloud capability. This particular case study is around the capability to bring in truck data to the existing analytics platform that Komatsu has available with data solutions. So what we've been able to do is leverage that existing platform and start to bring in this truck data from the onboard systems that are available to collect this data, and actually start to involve the subject matter experts on the electric dump truck side that haven't been so involved in the past in the analytics capability. And what we're doing is starting to really learn more about what we can deliver through the cloud computing side of analytics, and then how can we actually take this and deploy information back out to the customers. How can we deliver specific prescriptions out to the customer and collect feedback on how well that's performing and how we can continue to improve things.
So kind of wrap everything up, what Simon was talking about are very specific use cases that we're using, leveraging this technology. So using those same design patterns for your cloud compute and edge compute, we're looking to implement other types of analytics and algorithms in both those main key areas. And when we decided what we work on, we understand what brings value to our industry. And the key 4 areas that we look at what decides value is, first off, safety. Next, environment, productivity, and maintenance. These are the key areas that we really look towards to understand what value these analytics and AI technology we're bringing, what bucket do they fit into. So here's a little short video of where Komatsu is going forward.
From more than 150 locations across the globe, Komatsu employees are revolutionizing the ways customers extract minerals necessary to power modern society, the tools and technologies used to build our roads, homes, schools, and office buildings. Leveraging the power of big data and analytics, our Dantotsu solutions bring to life powerful information within our equipment. Komatsu's data scientists, service personnel, and distributors tap into the power of IoT to help customers monitor and manage equipment fleets, prevent unplanned downtime, and even predict machine performance. For mining operations, we're using data to power autonomous haulage systems that increase productivity, enhance safety, and reduce fuel consumption and CO2 emissions. With our advanced technologies and systems, customers are able to remotely operate equipment and remove people from harm's way. We also help customers train their employees on new operating methods, empowering a workforce ready to provide essential services in ways that are increasingly sustainable and high-tech. Since Komatsu's founding nearly 100 years ago, we've held true to our initial purpose, providing sustainable growth for people and communities. At Komatsu, possibilities become progress.
Are there any questions? No? Question over there? Right there.
You mentioned that it was very important for customers to have clear aspirational goals.
Yes.
Can you share with us an example of maybe your favorite aspirational goal from one of your customers? You don't have to say who it was.
I would probably say one the favorite one was, it was very, very big and broad aspirational because it was in a blending operation. They have multiple mines feeding this blending operation, and they had realized that their KPIs necessarily weren't all aligned, because the people who were at the stacker pile were about operations and the blend, and people at the processing plant is on how fast they can process. But the people in the mine is about tons. And so when one mine goes down that has a certain grade ore versus this one over here that's maybe 30 miles away has a different grade of ore, when it hits that stacker pile, it affects that downstream effect. And so their holistic aspirational goal was all the way from the plant to the pile to all their mines connected together to understand when they need to turn things on and turn things off to optimize that flow. So be okay with less tons here and there, but at the end, it'll give them more product, less work in process, less WIP, less inventory, and control their costs. So that was a pretty cool, very aspirational, big end-to-end picture. Any other questions?
There's just a quick question. How much investments has Komatsu invested in this area, and what has been the risk versus return for this innovation?
I think it's fair to say that the investment is fairly significant in creating this unified team, and I think we probably talked about some of those barriers in terms of where the risks might be. I think in terms of bringing in different organisations together, trying to kind of target this coordinated approach and do things in a unified manner, and avoiding where we have different parts of the organisation moving off in their own direction is probably one of the greatest challenges. And I think bringing together this unified team, certainly I've seen in my time in this team, things are really starting to move forward in a positive direction because there's something there to get excited about. There's this goal that we have of creating this unified data analytics platform and data analytics services. And so these different people from different parts of the organization can really come together and understand what we're trying to do and really have that motivation to achieve those goals. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
All right. I think our time is up. All right, well, thank you all for your time this afternoon. If you have any questions, feel free to stop at our booth.